In the latest edition of My Prague, the city's former mayor Jan Kasl shows me around some of his favourite places in the Czech capital. Jan Kasl is well placed to speak about his Prague, given that he was mayor of the city for 4 years at the turn of the millennium. Since then, the one-time Liberal politician has returned to his original profession of architect. Our tour of spots in the city close to Kasl's heart begins at Na Slamníku, a traditional pub right by Stromovka and very near where he comes from in Prague 6.
As we were living not far from here, I was used to go for my father to bring beer from Zaškovo, which was a small, I would say ugly, dirty pub in the corner of Tilmanova Street, Verdenská nowadays. But Na Slamníku I remember from maybe late early 60s, when I was like teenager, maybe 13, 14. This is the traditional meeting point for underground people, for musicians, for local people, for my schoolmates. I was attending the school in Krupkovo náměstí, not far from here.
And is your grammar school the building just up here that looks out over Stromovka?
Yes, exactly. That's the building which is next to the Svatý Gotthard and Gotthard Church.
And given that your school was right beside Stromovka, which is Prague's biggest and I guess best park, was Stromovka your playground?
Definitely. Stromovka was a place where we are escaping every day from school, down the hill, Gotthardova Street. In winter, bobsledging, skiing, or just sliding, summer walks, football.
Na Slamníku has been renovated. What's your view of the renovation? Because I haven't been here for many years. I used to come here a lot years ago. To me, it looks quite similar.
It's similar with the atmosphere, but it's not. It doesn't smell as much as it did.
It's also because the smoking ban has come in, right?
First, but then it was really the smoke was in the walls. I think that just painting wouldn't help. And it's very similar in the feeling, but you have new tables. You have new bar, you have probably some shelves are new, and it's quite pleasant. It's keeping the atmosphere, and thanks God, because of the ban of smoking, it won't be smelly and dirty.
There seem to be fewer and fewer of these kind of old school Prague pubs in existence. Are you nostalgic for those days or those kind of places?
Yeah, that's a good point. Nostalgic for the places, not for times, because the times were terrible. There was different regime. Despite the fact that I was not in jail, I was not a dissident, I was living a reasonable life without wishes to become an important person, becoming a red book owner, Communist Party member. So I don't regret times. I regret some atmosphere, certain things which are disappearing.
And are there any particular nights here that stand out in your memory, times in the past?
I definitely got sick sometimes because of the beer. There are some rendezvous nearby or here. If I'm not mistaken, there was one event when we were in the 9th or 8th class. With friends of mine, we were performing as a group, as a band, a rock band. I played bass guitar. We liked groups like Kings and Trogs and this type of music. So I think once there was some event that we tried to play here. I don't think it was a big success. It was more disaster than success.
I think this is the first pub where I really experienced barmen, because my first job was around the corner here. The first pub where I experienced barmen always slamming down one more pint before you could even finish.
Yeah, exactly. Not finishing, not asking, you gotta be here.
But it somehow worked.
Yeah, it worked always. The behavior of these guys is much better nowadays. I don't think that we have the type of palivets. You know it from Schweig, the rude guy who hates guests.
Luckily, there are fewer of those guys.
Yeah, there were many guys of this kind. Now fewer and fewer.
From Na Slamníku, it's maybe 500 meters to Pushkinovo náměstí, a quiet, leafy square in the middle of the Bubeneč district where Jan Kasl grew up, and after an absence of 2 decades, today calls home once again. Indeed, the park bench we sit on seems equidistant from a number of key landmarks in his life.
I was born like 100 meters, not even 150 meters from here, in Rooseveltova, I was in kindergarten, which now the street is Charles de Gaulle. I was living in Tilmanova, which is Verdenská street. Nowadays I'm living in Eliášova, and we are in the center, which is Puškinovo náměstí, called Ural for everybody, because the names of streets and squares were derived from First War battlefields, from legions of Czechoslovakia. So you can find street na Pijavě, na Marně, Italy, you can find Ural. There were a lot of names connected with the First World War because the Bubeneč new development was built in 20s, let's say from beginning till mid-30s. So all these were new streets.
What was it like actually growing up in this part of town in the 50s and 60s?
Well, it was a big fun because there were not so many cars. It was a very safe neighborhood. There were some soldiers, some officers living here, some policemen nearby, but we didn't feel like in an endangered area. I was walking from school alone. I was playing football. I was chatting, sitting here on benches, and later on looking for girls, what's going on.
You were telling me on our way here that this area changed a bit after the Soviet invasion of 1968. How was that?
That's true, because the Russian embassy was, as I remember from probably end of the war, Podkaštany, where it is. Then they built in mid-60s that industrial representation, or what was the name of that like semi-rounded building in Sibirské náměstí, and it continued. And after 68, because a lot of Russians moved to Prague, they built the complex of Russian grammar school and high school, which more or less destroyed the atmosphere of old Bubeneč in that part. And a lot of Russians moved in, so there were a lot of Russians living nearby. Nowadays I must laugh because probably I meet more Russians now than I met in early 70s, because Russians like it here. Kalinka used to be in the corner, Kalinka shop. Then there are a lot of other Arbat and a lot of Russian shops, and Russians like it in Bubeneč. They like Prague 6. They feel probably like safe, and I don't want to say welcome, but not refused.
I've never lived in Prague 6, but whenever I come here, I always feel it's a little bit kind of dead.
It used to be, when we moved in, there were not as many restaurants as they are. We said, oh, what's happening? Jesus, there are so many expats living here. And there were like 2 restaurants in the vicinity. It's much better now. And we were comparing to Vinohrady and Prague 7, because Letná was booming at that time. There was a coffee or restaurant every second building, and still is. While here it was a bit slowed down, and it's a bit lazy neighborhood. You are right that this is not the most active and vivid environment neighborhood. It's hipsters on bicycles and coffee shops and all that. People are walking the dog, small kids are playing. It's not noisy. It's a bit lazy neighborhood, and I have nothing against.
From Pushkinovo náměstí, Jan Kasl and I take public transport down to Malá Strana, the picturesque district beneath Prague Castle. The architect and former politician lived there from the late 1970s to 1999, when he returned to Bubeneč. Though our guide argues that time inevitably moves on, he does have a lot of nostalgia for the Malá Strana of yesteryear.
Mainly 80s, end of 70s and 80s, was a very lucky time in Malá Strana because there were not too many tourists. There were a lot of artists and a lot of people who enjoyed to be in the heart of the city, to be in Malá Strana. They somehow evaluated the quality of environment, architecture, history, monuments. And there were a lot of them were doing everything by themselves. So they changed their new apartments, villas for shabby ground floor, 3 rooms somewhere in Veselova Street just to be there. A lot of them had to move out because the renovation program came. That was part of my, let's say, political involvement in late 80s, because we were protesting and we were against the removal of local people somewhere out and renovation and some new, better people moving in, which was the case. We were a quite strong community. I was living in Varská Street 15, which was a big house with a big yard. And despite the fact I was a newcomer, in 77. They took me like local within a couple of years. and I became one of representatives of Malá Strana after the Velvet Revolution.
And how do you view Malá Strana today?
Yeah, that's a big difference. You may dream about going against the flow of time and to return to that melancholic atmosphere of foggy Vlašská Street, walking to Petřín, Obkovická zahrada, walking the dog or walking with kids. Well, it's over. It will never get back. I believe that some balance can be found between the logical interest and pressure of tourists and visitors and the interest of locals, because the local atmosphere is disappearing. But it's not a fault of tourists, it's a fault of local people who are not fighting for keeping that. The first thing they did after the Velvet Revolution, they sold if they restituted the house, they sold their bakery in Mostecká just for stupid money, because they simply saw the richness as their goal instead of keeping the tradition. You don't see it in Great Britain, you don't see it in many countries. People are proud of being a local butcher, a local baker, and they keep that tradition, and I believe that keeping that through that wild 90s or end of the last century, it would be profiting now. It would be really something unique.
This is a big question, but I wanted to ask you, as an architect, how do you view the way Prague has developed since the beginning of the 90s?
There are different aspects. From the point of view of renovation, reconstruction, improvement of the quality of environment, from health aspects to noise and all that, it's much better, and I cannot complain. I'm part of that. I was designing several houses and I took part in that process. Concerning the let's say the urban sprawl, sprouting to the environment, to the neighborhood, satellites built around the city, that's not the most positive development. But it was something which probably had to go through.
I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, what is, in your view, the best building that's been built in Prague in the last couple of decades?
New one. If you are talking about the new building, it's more difficult than renovation, because the best building, I would remind you, is Obecní dům, is the municipal house, which we renovated in 94-97 as a city of Prague. I have to quote Dancing House. I have to talk about Russian. If you would like to mention something on the international level, what's recognized, it's probably Russian Dancing House only.